imminent experiences in class yet of when mind and body and heart and spirit come together. And I, on a personal level, feel really lucky and happy that he's with us this week. I only know a little bit about your history of your life's work, so I'll just let you speak to that. And this is Chris.
Come on, people, let it rip. Feel how that changed the energy? Just a little bit. I don't have time to fuck around anymore. We don't have time to fuck around anymore. There's just not time. It's just only time to get down to the serious stuff. So let's get down to it. Mm-hmm. Rick asked me to talk about teaching. Like I've picked up some incalculable secret knowledge from teaching in Ohio for 30 years. I don't know. So I'll just tell you what I got, and then you can decide whether it was a good thing. But we're going to have fun tonight no matter what. And, you know, I don't think you wouldn't mind if we kind of finished before 10 o'clock, would you? It's been a long day. You people have been working hard. And for me, a talk is simply an excuse to get to the discussion. Right? Because that's where the juice is. That's really where the good stuff is. So I'm just going to kind of lay out some bullets, throw out some material to sort of focus our discussion. But I'm really hoping we can move quickly enough into some discussion. And if that goes really well, we'll still be out of here before 10 o'clock. All right?
Right on.
Yeah? Okay. Is Robert here yet? He's coming. There he is.
Finally!
Among his many illustrious publications, one of the ones that you may not come across too often is his beautiful introduction, his prologue, preface to The Living Classroom, which is a great honor. And he really made me look pretty good. Very good. It was just an honor. So this is kind of PCC certified, you know. And how many people have read this? Okay, all right. Well, I'm going to hit some bullet points on it, but I'm going to put it in a larger context. I'm going to give you some of the backstory to it. All right, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I came to write this and kind of what happened during it and what's it about. But this is like my second Saturn return book. I mean, I started teaching in '79, and this was published in 2008. That's pretty much exactly 29 years. And before I was coming up on sabbatical, because the only time I can... This is a little loud. Doesn't it sound a little loud? Maybe? No? Okay. All right. The only time I can write books is when I'm on sabbatical. I can write essays before, but it takes a lot of time to get in deep. So before I came up on my last sabbatical, there were two books that I was thinking about, a book on psychedelics and The Living Classroom. And so I went into session space, what I usually do when I have an important question. And after I was done with the various things, I said, what should I write? And it said, definitely The Living Classroom. Because by the time you write the psychedelic book, you're going to be so far out on left field that, you know, you're going to be beyond the mainstream pale. And now, where you are, The Living Classroom, you can do it in a mainstream fashion. So I said, okay. And as soon as I said okay, and as soon as I agreed to that and kind of made the mental intention, all sorts of wonderful things began to happen. I got some grant money that allowed me to spend more time writing the book, and it just, a lot of wonderful things happened. And The Living Classroom has been published, or there have been six excerpts or chapters that have been published in 5 different anthologies. It's gotten more airplay than any other single thing that I've written, and I think it's because of Robert McDermott's preface. No, I think it's because consciousness, collective fields of consciousness, is an idea that's kind of, it's bubbling up. Its time has come. We're ripe for it. And so, as the second Saturn return, this is a book that the universe wanted to be written. And it's basically a summation of the most important things I learned about teaching from my 30 years of teaching at Youngstown. Now, another little background, when I had my second Saturn return and I came to Youngstown, it broke my heart. I really didn't want to be here. I mean, I didn't go to 7 years of graduate school in order to teach at an open enrollment undergraduate college, about 12,000, 13,000 students in a Rust Belt town in Ohio. No graduate students. It wasn't my ideal. And I tried, like anyone with a grain of sense, tried desperately to leave for several years. Because, you know, when you get out of graduate school and you come to a good graduate school, you have a few years when you might jump out into something. And I tried jumping. Problem was, I had also encountered Stan's work, and I started my own psychedelic work in '79. A year after I started teaching, my mind got very quickly radicalized. I mean, 1 year I was writing essays on towards a unified theory of metaphor. 2 years later, I'm writing essays on the emergence of perinatal symptoms in Buddhist meditation. It's like, what happened? You know, my department was wondering what the hell happened to him. They hired a traditional analytic philosopher of religion and linguistic discourse, and suddenly I'm really saying, hey, this guy's onto something seriously good. Well, it wasn't happening, you know. Religious studies is a very conservative discipline. And by the way, did you appreciate our dressed up for you? This is just for you, yeah? Okay. Yeah. It wasn't happening, and so this came to a head 4 years after I was there 4 years, and there was the only job that it had opened in 5 years opened that year, and they decided to go with the very traditional philosophical, theological type, and I thought, fuck. And, you know, when you teach at a teaching university where you're really in the classroom a lot, you're teaching 3 courses a quarter, 9 courses a year, plus teaching in the summer. This is just poundingly difficult teaching. And I just said, okay, I give up. This is not what I wanted, but it seems to be what life wants. So I surrendered, and I said, I'm going to become the best teacher I can possibly become. I'm not going to fight it. I want to work with it. Let's see what happens. Let's see where it goes. And it went in some very interesting places. And the result of what happened, basically, I was able to put down in this book. And 1/3 of this book is my students. 1/3 of it, the back third of it, really it's the second book, are essays that my students have written over the years. And it's just beautiful, beautiful essays. And there were hidden reasons I learned later for why I was in Youngstown, and I'll get to those in a bit. And there were some benefits of being there. Because if you don't have a lot of graduate students and you don't have a lot of responsibility for that level, you can do a lot of exploration, you can do a lot of things. So if I ever wanted to learn something, I just said, I'll teach a seminar on it. And I was teaching a lot of courses and things that lay outside my discipline, and I just kind of learned a lot of things as I went through. And I was able to do a lot of innovation in our curriculum. I taught a lot of what I call transpersonal studies. You know, near-death episode research, reincarnation research, out-of-body research. I taught transpersonal psychology of religion. I taught lots of seminars on Stan Grof's work. So, you know, there were some benefits, there were some trade-offs. And one of the great benefits was non-traditionally aged students. About 40% of our students are non-traditionally aged, and that was a nice compensation for not having graduate students because they were much more seriously engaging in their studies than the 18, 19-year-old kind of might be. But the other thing that Youngstown gave me was an opportunity for deep spiritual practice. There's something, there's not much to do in Ohio. It's kind of boring, watch the corn and watch the corn, So it's just kind of a nice, contemplative, smooth environment if you want to do deep, serious work. And so I found out I wanted to do deep, serious work. So I started my psychedelic work right when I started my career. And I did 4 intense years, and then I stopped for 6 years, and then I did another 10 years after that. Now, I love teaching. I've always loved teaching. I've always liked to gab. But I tell you, teaching open enrollment university, it's frontline teaching. I mean, it's the kids who didn't, this first time anyone in their family's gone to college. A lot of people pulling them down, telling them, what do you want to go to college for? You know, just get a job at GM Lordstown and make cars. You know, you have to do what I call full contact teaching. This is take no prisoners, full contact teaching. You have to provide the motivation. You have to kick them in the butt. You have to slap them around. It is like, when I come here to teach, I mean, you guys are so easy. You're so motivated. You're already, you know, it's like you want to learn these things. You're there. In Ohio, it's a different game. And so they make you work for it. And I work for it. I'm willing to work for it. And eventually my classroom I began to think of it like a dojo. You know, it's like you're on my mat. No one's going to get hurt, but you're going to hit the floor a few times. And it's like, I don't have time to fuck around. You know, let's get down to it. So 30% of my students who sign up the first day, they drop out by the end of the first week. And I make it real clear. Just to get credits in the humanities is a perfectly good reason to be here the first day. It's not a good reason to be here the second day because it's easier ways to get the credit. But I also then try to show them what we can do, show them a sense of where we can go if you're willing to work. And I find that they're willing to work. If you give them a quality product, they're willing to work with you because they've been damaged often in their high school. They've been hurt. They've been crimped. They don't have high expectations. They're not at Oberlin. They're not at Yale. They have kind of low expectations. If you give them the promise of something substantive, they'll work their ass off for you. And they'll open their heart if you allow them to and go there. But when you start to psychedelics and you make the choice to work with psychedelics, you kind of have to make some adjustments in your professional life. I had to split my life in two. I had a professional life where I did the things that you do as a professor, and you do all the traditional things. You serve on the committees, and you do this, and you do that, and you publish. And then I had my personal life where I was doing the Groffian, deep psychotherapeutic work. And you can't let those two blend in the classroom. This is not CIS, all right? The good people of Ohio do not like to hear that their professors are dropping massive quantities of acid. You know? So you keep those two separate. So I didn't talk about my work in front of my classes. I mean, my own faculty members, it was like 10 years before they really got an idea of what was going on. I mean, when I would do a session, I was kind of so poor as a beginning faculty member, I had to borrow the tape player from one of my colleagues. He began to get a sense of what was going on, but you don't talk about it. I didn't talk about it for years. Because these were kept separate in the physical world, it ended up producing some very interesting complications or consequences that taught me a great deal about the nature of consciousness, because as we're going to see, consciousness did not split itself, even though I split my world. The world of mind is not dividable in that way, and there were some things that happened that began to make those things be connected. But there were also some personal consequences I'll come back around later about when you split yourself like this, and you cannot be your whole and complete self in every circumstance, and you kind of know what you're doing going in, but I didn't really understand what some of the long-term ramifications of that would be down the way. So this is what began to happen. Early in my teaching, a student asked me a question. You know, after you've taught a course 3 or 4 years, you pretty much have heard most of the questions that undergraduates are going to ask. So as soon as they ask a question, your mind starts running with an answer. This time, I just stopped. And I thought, among all the possible answers that I could give, what could I say that would be most in tune to this student? And my mind kind of stopped, And suddenly I had an image of a door in the back of my mind, and a piece of paper passed through it. And I read the piece of paper, and it was an idea. It was an idea, an answer that I'd never given to that particular question. So I just, okay, let's try this. I ran with it. And the magic happened. Teaching happened. The students' eyes lit up. Other people's eyes lit up. The energy went up in the room. Something good happened. So I thought, okay. And I really prepare. I bring it, look, I even brought notes to Esalen. I prepare my classes. I have a lot of notes. I really work them through, and I keep on track with my syllabus. I know where I'm going to be in the 12th week in a course, because otherwise, anyway, I really prepare for it. But that little door in the back of my mind gave me a teaching about integrating improvisational intuition with data, with my prepared work. So I began to pay attention to that door in the back of my mind and to work with it. And when I did, something happened in the room that didn't happen when I just kind of stayed in my prepared script. And then time passed. I kept on doing my psychedelic work, and those of you who've read Dark Night, Early Dawn, you kind of know it. I dropped into some pretty deep stuff pretty quickly and really was engaging deep collective dynamics and entering hell realms and the ocean of suffering that I talk about. And so it was pretty intense. But wherever I was on Saturday, Monday morning, I was back in the classroom doing my job. That was a commitment. I would not let my personal work get in the way of my professional work. I had a major commitment for my students. And then one day, when it was just an ordinary day, I'd been doing my ordinary thing, teaching intro-Eastern, intro-world, teaching psychology, religion, or transpersonal studies. This was actually an intro-Eastern course. A student came up after class, after he was sure that the room was empty and no one would hear what he had to say. And he said, "It's funny that you would use that example that you used in class today, because that's exactly what happened to me this week." And he told me a story, and it was right. It's like I had quoted his life story. So I thought, that's interesting, okay, a little synchronistic, but I never thought of myself as being psychically sensitive. I always think of myself as being kind of brickish in that way. I'm a psychic brick. I don't have those type of things. Some people do. I always envy those people who have, like, I was 12 years old when I had my first mystical experience. I thought, oh, lucky you, but it's not me. So I kind of, I was trained to brush this stuff off. But then a few weeks later, it happened again. Somebody came up and said, that's exactly what happened to my mother. And to make a long story short, the deeper my psychedelic work progressed, the more frequently this began to happen. People were finding pieces of their personal life showing up in my lectures, and I wasn't intending it, and I wasn't conscious of doing it. I would just be reaching for an example to illustrate a point, and something was connecting me to them, and I was like reaching into their life and putting it forward. Now, if you're in a room just looking for 3 credits or 4 credits in the humanities, and you're in the back of the room with your baseball cap on backwards, and you're just kind of passing time, and all of a sudden the professor is using your life to illustrate a point being made, how could you not take that as a personal invitation? How could you not have yourself snapped to attention? This began to happen, not a lot, but often enough that it kind of became a pretty semi-regular thing in my classroom. And then the plot deepened. When I began to go into deeper and deeper territory, when I got into the deep ocean of suffering, death, rebirth at the collective level, where you're just dealing with massive currents. It's like you're not dealing with the near shore currents, you're dealing with the big tidal flows in the collective psyche, and you're getting into deep collective death, rebirth meltdowns. I found that my students were being drawn deeper and deeper into deep existential crises in their own lives. It was like we were all part of one giant, massive, coex meltdown system. Addictions were bottoming out. Bad marriages or weak marriages were being forced into, grow or die situations. People were having suddenly unearthing sexual abuse. And I don't talk about sexual abuse, but something was bringing to the surface deep pains in their life. I can't emphasize enough that this was not my intention. In fact, as this thing began to happen, I began to even try to slow it down because it did not feel like, I didn't understand it, so I couldn't control it. It was happening. It's like, how do you ensure informed consent in a process which is so involuntary? I even put on my syllabus one time, I even put caution, taking this course may be dangerous to your psychological equilibrium. The students thought I was being cute. This thing, I called it the magic. The magic happened. I'd come home and I'd say to my wife, the magic happened today. I was just doing my stuff and bam, all of a sudden this lightning bolt came out of nowhere and blasted somebody apart, and all of a sudden we're having this intense conversation after class and they're moving. Something's moving in their life. I began to sort of function like a lightning rod. There was something sparking, and at that time I didn't understand really what was going on. I knew it had something to do with my psychedelic work, but I really wasn't prepared for the enormity of the implications of the paradigm shift that I was going to have to make, and eventually did make, to understand how this happened. And by the way, everything that's in the living classroom, I had been thinking about it and wrestling with it some, but it all dropped in intact, complete, in one psychedelic session. All the fundamental structure, and it's what gave me, seeing it clearly in that space, is what gave me the courage of my convictions to articulate it so that because if it's happening to me, I knew it had to be happening to other people. And it's not really about psychedelics. If I were using any type of spiritual practice that had the capacity to drop you deep into the collective psyche and into that territory, if you open up at that level, then you're naturally going to generate a kind of an energetic shock wave which is going to touch the lives of people that you have karmic connection to. And I'm a teacher, so I have a lot of karmic connections to my students. If you're a business person, if you're a researcher, if you're a choreographer, if you're working in the world and you're embedded in a network of relationships and you go deep into that level, see, the mind, the universe doesn't necessarily, from one perspective, it doesn't recognize individuals. It's like the weather. It doesn't really recognize individual atoms or molecules of, oxygen and whatnot. It's like, there's that side of it going. It just goes. So I began to realize that I was teaching on two levels at campus. There was something that began to happen. At one level, and for the most of the students, I was just an ordinary professor. I was teaching the stuff, and they came, and our relationship was about information exchange, and they mostly left pretty happy. But there was a second group of students who began to take pretty much all the courses I would teach, and they were here because just being in my classes began to be a source of transformation in their lives. They were here for the energy or something. They knew that something was positively moving in their life when we came together to work. And again, it wasn't my intention. Eventually, I began to realize that there is an energetic resonance This is just, it's nothing supernatural or paranormal. It's just normal. It's just natural. Life is like that. Consciousness is like that. Minds are like that. It's just an illusion of the physical senses that our minds are fundamentally separate. Well, they are, but there's that other side where the individual minds emerge out of a unified field of mind, and when you come together and you focus intention, there is a natural sharing that takes place, and if one of you is working at a very deep level, then the universe seizes that opportunity to awaken and to heal other beings. It's not something I was doing, it was something that the universe was doing almost in spite of me. You know? Okay. Teaching is information transfer and all that magic that you do, in the dance of the dance. But underneath that, teaching involves the direct engagement of mind and mind in the unified field of mind. Clarified states of consciousness are contagious. You cannot help it. It cannot help it. It just happens. Negative states are also contagious. But clarified states of consciousness are contagious. Our spiritual ecology simply does not allow private realization. If you're beginning to wake up, there's an energetic quality component of waking up. People around you begin to wake up. And if you're a teacher or you're in anything that works with people where you're working with groups, you have to be prepared for that consequence, for that implication. In fact, you cannot stop it. There may be a reason why people do this work in monasteries on mountains far away, because it kind of buffers, But if you're going to do this work in the world, you have to be prepared to handle the implications or the consequences of this natural process. And here's the thing, by the way, the better teacher you are, the more powerful this will happen. Because teaching is that magical mystery, it's that resonance. I mean, you're working communication, you're trying to organize intention, you're in the dance. And if you're good at that, well, then that just makes it easier for this stuff to happen. So, eventually, I had no recourse, but I had to learn what was happening. I had to understand what it means to teach at this level. What time is it? Okay, wow, okay. What does it mean to teach when your person has kind of become some kind of added catalyst into the room? It's not just the ideas that are the catalyst, but your person has become the catalyst. I had to learn how to manage, not control, but to manage the energies that were involved. How to make it more efficient, how to protect the students, how to choreograph it a little bit. Then I began to realize it wasn't just what was happening in the room was really too big to be understood simply in terms of an energetic resonance between my spiritual practice and my students. That was part of what was going on, but then I began to realize there was something else going on. Students were beginning to show up in each other's dreams. There was something happening socially in the room. What was happening was simply, I began to understand it was too big and too powerful simply to be explainable in terms of just a one-on-one resonance between me and them. There was a second dynamic that was moving in the room. Now, I had read Rupert Sheldrake, his books, A New Science of Life, and The Presence of the Past, and The Rebirth of Nature. I'd read his books. I understood the concept of morphogenetic resonance and morphic fields, but Rupert is working in very, very big fields, long, historical, evolutionary fields, and I didn't see the relevance of those giant fields to what was happening in my classroom because we were together for 15 weeks at a time. That's not a whole lot of time. But then again, in this one particular psychedelic session, suddenly I saw, oh, you mean short-term groups generate feels. Feels are generated whenever people gather together, and the more focused they are in intention, and if they're together long enough and deeply engaged enough, and this is very important, if the group is repeated, if it's a repetition that goes on, these feels emerge. Now, they emerge out of the unified nature of consciousness. Consciousness is an inherently unified field, so it's not like an erector set where you're putting two pieces that are really separate, linking them together. It's kind of like that, but at a deeper level, what's happening is an underlying potential is being sparked into form. Group feels. Group mind. Phil Jackson, not a very mystical guy, as far as I know, but coach of the Los Angeles Lakers, right? He sees it. He says, we see this a lot in critical situations. When players are totally focused on the team goal, their effort can create chain reactions. It's as if they become totally connected to one another, in sync with one another, like 5 fingers on one hand. Right? Now, Howard Bloom, great author, wonderful book, The Global Brain. He wrote, in other words, without knowing it, individuals form a team. Even in our most casual moments, we pulse in synchrony. Isn't that a wonderful phrase? We pulse in synchrony. Other symptoms of this being a field phenomenon. I began to realize that there was, just like Rupert Sheldrake's theory predicts, there was a change in the learning curve taking place in my classes. It's kind of like, this is too simple, but it's almost as if one class was starting where the last class stopped. It wasn't quite like that, but you know, you got a course scripted, you have it kind of worked out, you know it's a winner, you've refined it, you've spent several years polishing it, you know you're taking them A to B to C to D. You walk into class the first day and all of a sudden they're giving you the cues that they're already in B, they're already in C. And you've got to rearrange your entire syllabus, or you've got to step up because something has shifted, they've moved. I began to realize there was a learning that was taking place in one class between semesters. There was some kind of developmental process, and you go through certain turning points. All of a sudden things are stable, and then something triggers, and every class in that subject after that you're working in a different context. And that's a pain in the ass to have to rearrange your syllabus. So once in a while it's like, I'm not going to do that. We're going to stay with the tried and true. That's bad news. That doesn't work because the students get bored and the energy in the room, and then you spend so much time trying to lift up the energy. And it's like, no, it's better to go with it, find where they are, because if you find them, it's not just that you'll do a better job teaching, but there's something that they're giving you in where they are. They're going to take you places that you haven't been before yourself. I began to differentiate 2 different levels of these fields. So there's the class field, I call it, and then the course field. The class field is created by the energy of the people who are in the room today. All right? It's kind of like in a tree. If there are many, many rings of a tree, the outer ring, not the cambium ring. What's the outer ring of the tree called? I'm blanking on it. Sorry, having a brain fart. You know, the living outer edge of the tree? Not the bark, right underneath the bark. Pardon? Cambium. Okay. That's the class field. All right? The course field is a much older, bigger field. It's the energy, it's a kind of a residual arc in the learning of the field, which has been contributed to by every student who has ever taken this course with this particular professor. Now, I'm going to kind of restrict it to that with this particular professor. I think it's more than that, but in the beginning, the class field may be the stronger field. But over time, when the course field, when you've been teaching 20, 30 more years, the course field gets very strong. So here you've got three systems. The individual student, whose consciousness is being affected by the class field, whose consciousness is being affected by the course field. So here you've got the universal mind, the individual, and what we're suggesting is that this organic relationship between universal mind and individual mind has these intermediate fields, which when those fields get strong and when they are skillfully focused, as you can, then it triggers, it animates, it empowers, it makes more creative, more adventuresome the learning of the individual mind. If you were a coach, we'd be talking about performance fields. If we were physicians, we'd be talking about healing fields. I'm a teacher, so we're talking about learning fields. But fields is fields. Okay? Old fields, young fields, present fields, past fields. I learned that you could work with these fields. I learned some tricks. I start working with the fields of a class before the class begins. There are certain practices that I do, because to me the field is the unregistered student in the room. Right? It's a tangible thing. I even will go so far as when I'm looking at which books to assign a semester from now, I sometimes try to tune into the field that's emerging around this course to determine whether I should go to A or go with B. I do certain kinds of practices, spiritual practices, because I don't want a lot of old karma screwing things up in the classroom. I don't want a lot of bad vibe from you, because, I'm a reincarnationist. I believe in reincarnation. I think, life being what it is, I'm assuming I've got former lives with some of my students. I'm assuming that sometimes it worked out well, and we got something good that came out of it. Sometimes maybe it didn't work out too well. We got some bruises or some pain that's going to come up. I don't have any time for the bad stuff, so I do these practices. It's like, I'm sorry if I hurt you, without the students knowing. This is something you don't do to them. I'm sorry if I hurt you. Please forgive me. If you hurt me, I forgive you. Let's just get on with it. And there are practices you can do. Every spiritual tradition has practices for cutting the cords of karma. I used to use a Hawaiian kahuna practice called ho'oponopono, which means cutting. And then later when I learned chud, which is a Tibetan practice, which also means cutting, I would do that practice. So before a class begins, when I get a roster, which usually comes in about a month before the class begins, I'm doing chud with this roster, with the students in front of me. I've often wondered what my faculty colleagues would think if they came in and I'm doing a bell and ringing and I'm singing a Tibetan prayer for students in a class that hasn't even begun yet. But once you understand fields, this is simply just being efficient. It's just being efficient. You're working with the energy before there are physical beings present. Once the class begins, then you get to see the beings that are physically the embodiment of the energy that you've been picking up on. And you can work with fields during the class. You can do it behind the scenes, and there are ways in which you can do it in the class. Visualization exercises can empower fields. Various types of cafe conversations can cross-fertilize fields. One of the other things that's important to do is to close the field at the end of the semester. Now, by closing the field, I don't mean like you dissolve the field, but there's a sense in which every class has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's important if you're going to empower fields and if you're going to work with fields and you're going to invite that type of dynamic into the room, it's important at the end of the semester to close the field and help students detach from the field, to re-empower them as individual learners and then send them on their way where they will now go on to new fields and connect with new groups and then go on to new fields and connect to new. You don't want to encourage an attachment to the field, but if you don't close the field, sometimes students get stuck. They'll show up at your office 2 weeks after a course is over, kind of wanting to talk, and I began to realize there was something wrong here. It wasn't just that they liked the course, but they were still psychically attached to the energy of the class, but they didn't have a place to take it. And so you have to do things both shamanically and strategically, pedagogically, to close the field. So that, like a final exam is a good way to help close the field. Let them demonstrate their learning. Whenever you have a kind of a beer or a pizza at the local student union at the end of a course, you always are asking, what are you going to do next? Where are you going next? What's next on the agenda? You're focusing. You collect information on the course. You get student feedback in the course, and you tell them, I'm going to use your feedback to make this better for the next class. You're reinforcing the sense that they are part of a lineage of learning, and their time is over. And that's okay. Everybody, our time together is finite. Waking up in the classroom. Waking up, right? We're talking about, some type of spiritual awakening. What do we mean? What is that? Waking up simply is, in one perspective, it's simply waking up to the simple fact that nobody holds their own being in and of itself. The beginnings and ending of our being lie outside of ourselves. It's waking up to the tangible fact that our lives are deeply intertwined and woven together, and if you can stand in a certain way, you can feel that weave, and when you feel that weave strongly, that chronic sense of tightness of the self relaxes, and the wind blows through the trees and the leaves dance. It's just waking up. Waking up to something that has always been there. It didn't start, it doesn't stop, you don't make it happen, it's just the natural condition of being. The bubble pops. Shunyata, right? Emptiness. Emptiness of self. But the translation of shunyata that I like the best is transparency. Transparency. It's like, I'm here, but everyone's here, but we become transparent to the ground condition. We become transparent to the true condition of things. People wake up in all sorts of circumstances, in all sorts of activities, with all sorts of context. And outside of my own psychedelic work, one of the places where I've experienced this simple truth very deeply is in the classroom. When something uses my mind or uses me, and there is this wind that blows invisibly between the students and myself, or between us together, and that delicious feeling of being used, where you just kind of relax and something happens which is bigger than you. Oh, there's no self here. There's no self in it. This is something which is inherently trans-self phenomena. And when you just appreciate the trans-self nature of this exchange, the joy of discovering that the life that is alive in you, the life that's moving in this room, is actually the life of all things. It is the life of all things. Your life and their life, your life, it's the life of all things. Relaxing into that. Even when we forget, even when I forget, life doesn't forget. Life is still one. The transparency is still there, whether or not I'm remembering it or not, whether I'm paying attention to it or not, it's always there. It's just there, waking up. You can wake up in any circumstance, in any condition, and it's lovely to wake up when you're working in the classroom. It's just, why not? The circle of learning. I had the experience many times, I'm sure you have too. You go through an exercise, you go through an experience, you read a book, you learn something. Very quickly, a few days later, a week later, somebody asks you a question in class. If they had asked you 2 weeks before, you wouldn't have anything to say because you didn't know that. But because they asked you now, you have something to say, and you give it to them, and it's important to them. And you think, wow, isn't that cool? Something is alive in the universe. It's able to use something that I learned in order to help somebody else. That is just got to be damn cool. That's neat. But then I began to realize, I haven't seen this all work out yet. It's much more complicated than that. It's not simply that something that I learned is being used by the universe to facilitate a learning in somebody else. It's actually often the reason I learned this in the first place, the reason I had this experience in the first place is because there was a need to know coming at me. And my system picked up the need to know, and I had the ability to learn so that when this happened, when this need came forward, the exchange took place. The circle of learning. And when I began to realize that this was happening all the time, it had been happening for decades before I even understood it. That's when you really have to let go big time, because you don't even own your career. You don't even own your own academic ideas, your own academic passions. Your passion and your students' passion are intertwined right from the very beginning. And that's when you either clutch and get real tight on it and try to get back in control of it, or you let go very, very deeply and you begin to the beginnings and endings of your life did not start and stop with you. The reason you want the things you want, the reasons you love the things you love, the reasons that you just have the hungers that you have are not independent of the loves and hungers and the wishes that other people have. We're just constantly processing these things at multiple levels all at the same time. Now that's a dance. Isn't that? It's just a dance. Well, I kept doing the psychedelic work. I kept going deeper and deeper. I began to get into, things I haven't written about publicly yet. Dark Night, Early Dawn takes the first 10 years, but there's a second 10 years. Deep stuff. Stuff that many of you have touched and worked in. To experience reincarnation not at the soul level, not at the individual level, but at the aggregate level. To experience what it's like to be in a species that's reincarnating so that every individual is like sloughing cells off of skin. This massive, magnificent, beautiful organism. The learning of the species mind, generation by generation, billions of people. Beginning to be drawn into the larger story of humanity's evolutionary pivot, going into vast tracts of time, being drawn into the crisis that's fermenting underneath history, bringing us into this boiling point, going beyond the boiling point to see what's being generated, what has been being in the works for 100,000 years, and this crescendo that we're moving to. In some ways, can you imagine what it would be like to go through pregnancy and labor and not know what a child was? In some ways, what we're going through only really, for me, began to make sense when I began to get a taste of the human that's coming, the human that we're all in the process of gestating through history. And then to enter into some of the domains that I've called the domain of diamond luminosity, or the Buddhists call it Sambhogakaya, best as I can determine, this deep, deep intimacies with the divine. Intimacies so deep, they eventually became for me too painful to leave. Just too painful. I couldn't keep going back into them. I could not share this knowledge with my students. I didn't talk about my work, but I was always teaching Stan stuff, so there was a sense in which I could teach through Stan, but eventually my work reached and tapped into territory I could not bring that to them. Even though they were willing, they just didn't have sufficient preparation. They were undergraduate students in Ohio. They were not graduate students in California. I could not bring that to them. And something began to happen inside my body, because my natural being is to share. But I could not share these things that meant so deep to me. I had knowledge that I could not bring forward. I had to stop myself from bringing it forward. I began to lose control of my voice. There was so much tension in my voice because someone would ask a question, and inside me there would come this knowing that would naturally want to reach out and share. But I couldn't, so I'd clutch, and I'd lose control of my voice, and there'd be kind of a bark. It's kind of embarrassing. It's kind of a bark. And I'd stop. It was getting pretty intense. This was when my work was really getting to the peak stages in 97, 98, 99. I stopped it in 99. I really didn't know where this was going to go. And then a number of things happened in my personal life. My marriage ended. Dark Night, Early Dawn was published. And then I was given an opportunity to come to be the director of education at IONS. And so I thought, okay, took care of my family. I mean, the worst experience of my life was going through that divorce. Taking care of my former wife, taking care of my children, moving them, getting everything situated, working that beginning of that healing process. But then I went to California and I thought, this will be the new platform. This will give me out. I'm out of Ohio. I'm out of teaching undergraduates. I'm going to be able to work with more people who are already through class A, B, and C. We can start at D. You know, this is going to be a new platform for me. And it was kind of initially, but 2 years later, it didn't work out for a variety of reasons, don't need to go into. Really did not want to stay there. And I came back to Ohio and I resumed my teaching career, which is a hard transition to go through. I knew I didn't belong at YSU anymore, in Youngstown anymore, but this is where I had to be because I had to get my kids through college. I had college tuitions to go. I really couldn't step away until my youngest graduated from college, and that was still a number of years off. So I kind of, adjusted. I had stopped the intense psychedelic work. My system was beginning to slow down. But I knew that something wasn't right. I mean, I was really ungrounded. I had developed an over-attachment to marijuana. I began to realize that part of me just was not willing to come down off the mountain. And my smoking was keeping me from coming all the way down off the mountain. And I realized I had to come completely down off the mountain. And that took some time. It took 5 to 10 years after I stopped my work before my whole system kind of recalibrated down to the new baseline. As soon as my daughter graduated from college, I resigned from YSU. And then the question becomes, how do I share what I know now? And so it's by writing. It's by writing, and wonderful opportunity to spend some time with you. I mean, it's just, you are such a blessing to me. Really. Such a blessing. Your hearts and your minds are so beautiful. Ah, damn. How do I contribute to the resurgence, the renewal of the psychedelic renaissance? How do I personally contribute to my discipline? How do I help them realize the potential of psychedelics for philosophy, for my original discipline? How do I bring that forward? How can I help others tap into the cosmology, the cosmological depths that they are already deeply part of without exposing themselves to some of the risk and making some of the mistakes that I made along the way? Knowing when to pull back, knowing when to stop, knowing when the students whom you love, and I love being with the students, I love being in the classroom, but knowing when those are not my students anymore. I can't keep doing this, pulling back. And then writing, writing and then seeing what happens, seeing what comes from there. So the book now I'm working on is Stealing Diamonds from Heaven, which is this whole story. And then I have another one I want to work on called The Birth of the Diamond Soul, which is really about my sense of what's happening in history and in nature. Okay. Not bad. 9 o'clock, right on. Pretty damn good, huh? Okay. I'm done. Let's stand up. Unkink your ankles and your knees. Okay.
Well, reference here for Chris.
Anybody going to say? Nobody's going to? I'll say something.
Okay, go.
Well, I think you can see why I was so delighted to write the foreword to Chris's book and how easy it was, to tell you the truth. So, thank you. And for those, any of you who are interested in continuing this conversation with Chris or with me, with various parts of what you're doing and its importance to CS, I would be happy to participate, maybe even while we're here, if we can figure that out.
Okay, that's good.
Let's do it now.
Okay, that's possible.
Pull up a cushion.
Okay. I don't know if any of you are going to be leaving. I have this would really be breaking the mood, wouldn't it? We'll save it for later. Okay. I do have an announcement for later, but let's save it till the discussion.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody who wants to leave at any time,
Yeah.
please do.
Yeah.
But, I'm very moved by Chris, as you can tell. And if you read the forward, you'll see that it was an easy affirmation to make.
Now, what most of you don't know is that I was Robert's sitter in a holotropic breathwork session right down at the big house.
That's true.
And he was my sitter. We got down together. Okay, floor is open. Let's talk.
Okay. So
Yeah.
maybe I'll begin with a little explanation of why I jumped up here.
Oh, good.
So you said you did Youngstown for 30 years.
33.
33.
Yeah.
Well, I had a very similar experience for 20 years
Yeah.
at Baruch College,
Yeah.
where I taught. All my students were first generation.
Yeah.
I taught I never had fewer than 40 students. I never taught the same student twice. I taught 40 students 3 times a day, each semester for 20 years.
Yeah.
So it's a little something. Then I come to Paradise, not as a faculty member initially, but I've now been a faculty member for 14 years. All the time looking for the kind of experience that you described. And either I'm the brick that you said you were. So I didn't have all those things. I also didn't have a whole psychedelic practice.
We can fix that.
There's no shortage of people in this room who are prepared at a moment's notice to get me on their team, believe me. That said, I want to say that in this psychedelically inspired community, neither has it ever happened that a person pressured me. Not
Good.
once.
Yeah, that's the way it's supposed
Not,
to be.
of course it is.
Yeah.
It isn't always in life,
Yeah.
but it is the case.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so I'm always looking for the kind of what I call the etheric body
Yeah.
to be experienced and shared with language and
Yeah.
examples and whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it doesn't happen or it hasn't happened. It certainly has not happened at the level that you described in the living classroom, which I think is quite an amazing document. If you haven't read it, it's an amazing document. So I just wanted to I jumped up here very spontaneously, or you field called me up, right, I actually had a pretty hard trip, if you remember.
Yeah.
In fact, everybody was out of the room. I don't know why I'm talking about this. Everybody was out of the room, and Stan relieved you.
Yeah.
And when I came out of this experience, and I insisted to Chris that it was about 10 minutes. It was actually 3 hours. And there was a hand that I recall experiencing something like a baseball glove. Which was Stan's hand on my face that went from here all the way up. And this giant of a mountain of a man with exquisite, gentle, compassionate quality.
Yeah.
Right? I had this opportunity to talk at the conference. I almost said that, but I said, no, it's not really what it's about. But it's in my mind because we just had this great experience of Stan. So anyway, we had that together. I sat for you. That's right.
Yep.
So it's a very bonding experience to
Yeah.
have this. The other time I did it was in my house in Ashbury Street with Will Keepin.
Well, he's good. You're in
Very
great
good.
hands. Yeah,
I know. I
that's
stopped.
good
I
hands.
went to the mountain twice.
Yeah.
But anyway, getting back to you and your work and your relationship to our students, which is quite intense, considering that you don't teach that often.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's quite intense. I hear.
Yeah.
Get him here, keep him here, that kind of thing, which I listen to and remember and try to be, do what we can. But
Keep it up.
Yeah.
Keep it up.
yeah,
Let me mention something about the etheric field.
Yeah.
'Cause this comes at the very end of the Living Classroom, because the Living Classroom was published in 2008, written in 2006, 7, and I stopped the heavy-duty psychedelic work in 99. Over time, this energetic resonance calmed down. It didn't go away entirely, but instead of kind of being like a lightning rod where it was happening around me without my being, now I had to kind of cooperate with it. I had to kind of let it happen, not like I could control it, but there was a sense of, it was a subtler thing. And that kind of teaches us something about the etheric level. The practice empowers the system. You open up, you bring in heavy-duty energy, you move from 110 volts to 240 volts. Naturally, you're going to activate these inherent circuits. But then if the system calms down, it's not like the circuits, the network is there, but there's not as much energy driving it. And there's a wisdom in the pace of evolution. There is a certain, not a risk, I think, I mean potentially, but there is a certain, if you drive the system hard, things are going to happen, then you calm down, things calm down. So I don't have that transparency today that I did at the peak in the living classroom. And now it's kind of a subtler thing than it was then.
Rick's going to add something.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
I don't really, I'll just talk loud. Rules are rules. The period of the greatest transparency, as you described it, was that whole period of the Uranus-Neptune conjunction, which was indeed a field, a collective field that did exactly that, dissolving of boundaries, the creation of transparent fields. It's a perfect expression of it in a very creative way. And it was, it basically, started coming in the mid to late 80s and then was just totally cooking all through the 90s. And then, once it got to 2001, it reached the 15-degree mark and that pulse that, PCC was born under and many other, now we've got the Uranus-Pluto and a whole nother kind of driving intensity is here. But what you were describing of the living classroom and the morphic field that was taking and these fields, these course fields, these class fields, etc. It's both the perception and the capacity to cultivate it and the capacity to name it and articulate it very much, I think, is an expression of that larger Uranus-Neptune, the privilege that we all had to have had that going all during those years.
Yeah, thank you.
So where are we going, Chris?
Richard.
Chris, I just want to express my deepest gratitude for some of us that have experienced you in the classroom and see the living embodiment of your written word in person. It is unbelievable to be in the presence, and I feel every time I leave the classroom, I feel just a little bit more dignified and connected to a larger purpose in life. And on a personal note, like 5 or 6 weeks ago, I started teaching poetry to 6th and 7th graders, and I was terrified in front of those kids. I felt like I didn't even know how to speak to kids, and if it wasn't for your book, I think I would have fallen apart, because I had this distinct feeling with the help of your book that not all responsibility laid on my shoulders, and I could actually just allow the field to create the class, and sure enough it happened, and I saw it in living action. So I do have a question that I want to add to this little note, and that is, what cosmological implications do you see from the field experience that you have made in your life? That the whole universe seems to relate in that potential to create fields everywhere we look. Is a galaxy a kind of field like that? And any thoughts?
Well, the nice thing about it is it was working just fine for it's been working this way for billions of years before we even began to understand what was going on. So whatever's going on, it's been going on for a hell of a long time. The fact that we're beginning to understand some of these dynamics and maybe can participate in them more consciously. Some people, actually some of my colleagues have said, well, this is kind of like, it undermines your individuality, all this kind of ego, fear kind of stuff. But it's like, look, we're just beginning to play with something that's been playing with us for a long time. So I don't know I don't know how it all works. You know, I don't know the full ramifications of all these dynamics. It's just that, look, when we just kind of work together, we synchronize ourselves, we work with guided intention, we want focused intention, we do these exercises together, what do you know? There's a little bit of bleed through that comes together, a little reinforcement that takes place. Hey, then it gets scary. You think about, well, there's a field around the Pentagon, there's a field around shopping malls, there's a field around the New York Times, there's a field around all, you know, so fields are everywhere. They're not good or bad. They're not moral, just moral things. There's negative. There's a field around the Ku Klux Klan. There's a field around the NRA and all the chapters of the NRA. But it's been going on for a long time. It's just the connective tissue of consciousness, reaching sort of threshold proportion. But once you understand that, then you kind of begin to be a little bit more sensitive to your own psychic hygiene. You don't want to put yourself in certain psychic fields because, yeah. You know, it's like I used to take my kids to karate matches. And, oh man, it's like, ooh, it's like, ooh. You know, it's just kind of, you know, but going to an art museum, that's kind of a nice field. You know, so it's.
Why did you say, as I think you did, that they're not good or bad, but you just indicated that some fields really are pretty negative and difficult?
By good or bad, I mean nature doesn't seem to be, at least I don't think of nature as in this particular respect, reinforcing morally good fields and undermining morally injurious fields or negative fields. Now I, as an evolving consciousness, I choose to cultivate certain energy in my life. And by choosing, if I want to cultivate that energy, then I kind of want to detach from this energy. So I may make moral distinctions, and I may want to associate myself with fields of compassion, intelligence, creativity, and not put myself in the context of intense competition, you know, corrosive, vitriolic fields. But it's kind of like, you know, the ocean has currents. The ocean has riptides. The ocean moves one way or the other. We drown or we float, but they're not moral.
So we have two differences in our worldview that have surfaced in the last few minutes.
Okay.
You might be interested. One is, for me, this entire discussion takes place in a comprehensive evolution of consciousness.
Yes.
Since we all here, mostly all here for Rick's talk, just remember what he was saying about the uniqueness of the modern Western consciousness. Well, that fact that Rick is so good at articulating, but he and I both are influenced by Owen Barfield, Saving the Appearances, and many books like that, leads me to say that, and to you for your comment, that something like the etheric was immediately evident without the separation that came about in the modern West. And so now we are in a situation where we have to learn, I think by love, to reconnect with our etheric and the etheric that surrounds us in a way that we do try to discern etheric fields, which may be synonymous, tautological, okay, that are working against love. And we have to know that they are and do what we can to transform them.
I'll go even further than that. I agree with you.
Great.
I think the universe, you know, like Jung said, the universe tilts towards growth.
Right.
Right? So I think there are ways and levels of the universe that's actually encouraging the forces of compassion and tilting it towards growth. But when I say that the fields themselves are natural phenomena that are not in themselves good or bad, they just are, that doesn't mean that there aren't other dynamics that are at play which are encouraging the emergence or strengthening in subtle ways perhaps fields of compassion, which are fields of oneness, which are fields of growth, and kind of not giving as much support to fields which are inherently divisive and inherently destructive of the unified fabric of life.
I think I would want to revise your language just a little bit.
Okay.
Because I don't often talk about anything inherently without adding its multiple relationships.
Yes.
So I don't think that fields are negative all by themselves. They're negative in relation to something that the universe needs to accomplish.
That's interesting language. I have to sit with that for a bit. Okay, let me sit with that for a bit.
I like that.
In relationship that they have to accomplish. Okay, let me sit with that for a bit.
I mean, Jungian tends towards growth, or Steiner talks about the universe is trying to evolve towards love and freedom.
Yeah.
I actually think it's towards love, and freedom is only the, I shouldn't say only, is the condition which makes love possible.
Yeah. To me, love is an expression of the inherent oneness of life. And it fosters it, it expresses it, and that's why it's so powerful. It is the experience of the inherent unified nature of reality, you know.
Yeah, and therefore those fields that are emphasizing and militating on behalf of disunity and fear, hatred, and delusion, I consider to be negative. And to be, and that it's part of my life to try to transform those fields which I also advance against what I think of myself.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you on that. I mean, you know, just a little side note, Youngstown, one of the reasons I learned that I was in Youngstown particularly, short, very quick bullet, it was my soul's choice to do the work with the ocean of suffering that I ended up doing for all those years in the psychedelic work. San Francisco is not a very good environment in which to deal with those kind of negative fields. Youngstown is a very, very good environment to deal with those kind of negative fields. Youngstown has made the cover of Time magazine twice as Mobtown, USA. Had the highest murder per capita rate in the country for a number of years. And the mafia dominated Youngstown politics for many years, lots of gangland executions. And it goes all the way back to the Native Americans where some terrible massacres took place there. So there's a field, a huge kind of psychic field, a lot of Eastern European immigration, a lot of patriarchy, a lot of abuse of women. It's really kind of, it's a place where bad karma comes to work itself out. And so I believe in working to lift those fields, lift those energies out of the collective psyche, and I affirm that very, very deeply. But when I say that the fields themselves, I mean, the aggregation of that negativity is a natural phenomenon. I don't mean to affirm it as a natural, therefore good. It's an aggregation of energy which is natural.
How about intelligible?
Intelligible. Okay.
Wendy wants to get in.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Go.
Sami, how'd you like a job?
Oh, yeah. I've taken her already.
Good.
To be at the somersault from now on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris, for coming and sharing with us. It was beautiful to see you speak so freely and express everything you want to express and articulate it very well.
Thank you.
My question, my curiosity in working with fields is comes with the idea of, I think about the form of an atom and how the electron jumps from ring to ring with no time taken.
Yeah.
And with that idea as a kind of a model for how the universe is structured,
Yeah.
I was curious to hear what you would have to say about the evolution of consciousness in a relational field and quantum leaps in that
Yeah.
field.
I don't know. I mean, we know about emergence. We know that, things happen, things jump. We hit tipping points. We think we're coming to a tipping point, an evolutionary tipping point. When people have near-death experiences, they go through these exponential increases in awareness in a very short period of time, and more than one author has suggested that the human race is coming to a collective near-death experience, a potential jumping point. If fields come to tipping points in small groups, in Dark Night, Early Dawn, I suggest that we have a long way to go and very little time to get there. And I suggest that the only way we could possibly make it as far evolutionary-wise as we have to go is if we understand field dynamics. Because from field dynamics, we're not trying to change 7 billion minds, we're only trying to change one mind. And the 7 billion experiences are being processed at an integral level. And so if we understand nonlinear systems, and if we hypothesize that the human collective unconscious is a system, and it can be thrown into nonlinear dynamics or far from equilibrium conditions, perhaps nonlinear conditions can emerge, and Brian helped me out here. But when a system goes into beyond far from equilibrium conditions, things happen fast and things can jump. And I really think that some dynamic like that underlies the potential that human beings have to make a quantum step change. It's not simply an aggregate of a lot of individuals, but there is a kind of a deeper summation coming forward in all those individuals. Is that?
Following on Brian again, okay, I'll let other people talk, but I remember what I was thinking. Simon, your job.
Yeah.
Sorry. You?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just saying, Sami, that it would be really cool if you somersaulted. And I could tell you didn't understand me. I felt so bad. I thought he thinks I didn't like his somersaulting. I loved it. It was fantastic.
No, I could tell that you did.
Oh, good. Okay, great. So I actually didn't want the microphone.
Yeah.
But Robert does. And so here we are.
Tommy. Jesse's all the way back, and
You can go first.
Aaron? Lydia. Lydia.
Thanks. I have a question about working with fields.
Yeah.
I have two questions, but they might have some very similar answer.
Okay.
One is that I could see how working with fields can be almost applicable in kind of any relational situation.
Yes.
So I'm inquiring if you could share something specific about a practice in working with fields. And I guess my second question is about a lot of us do work in relationship to being aware of the crisis that's happening in the world and the level of destruction and chaos that a lot of people are experiencing. And I guess whether it's a person we're trying to sort through something with, or being present with and wanting to be strong and good and used in the face of also knowing that we're going to live our lives being very aware and maybe really close to levels of destruction that are scary, and processing and being with lots of fear and anger and delusion. So do you have specific practice that you'd like to share, or does that what make you think of something for us to maybe digest on?
Compassion practices. That's what comes to mind. First of all, you're already doing what you're describing. You're already doing it. Each one of you has made a choice to radically insert yourself into an evolutionary process to bring about a fundamental shift and an improvement in the condition of the planet. You've traveled across the country. You've aligned yourself with a very, very distinctive institution, and many of you are just like following pure gut instinct somewhere that you can't see because it's not a traditional track. You're already doing it. You're already plugged into the dynamics that are building pressure-wise. You're already taking in massive quantities of information. You're already watching a cooking taking place. You're already reaching for becoming the embodiment of the solution. So everything you're doing, that you're talking about, you're already doing. So how can you do that better, is what you're really asking. Just a little bit better. And I think it's really important to take care of yourself, because there's a lot of wear and tear and burnout, because this is not over. This is not going to be fixed soon. You're going to die and still be in process. Your children will die and will still be in process. So it's a marathon type of thing. How do you keep yourself perpetually replenished in a long term like that? How do you kind of stay attuned to the opportunities? There's several things that come to mind, but I guess the one that comes most deeply are compassion practices. And every tradition has compassion practices, whether it's exchanging self for other, or some type of practice where you just voluntarily expand your heart into deep beauty, into deep pain, into broad horizons, and just hold that, and then bring it back down again, and then take up your individual day's work. Every tradition has practices like that, because compassion is the recognition of the inherent oneness of life. And so if we're talking about a revitalized contact between the individual, the highly refined, highly evolved, historically beautiful individuality, but reconnecting into the larger context of the larger field of life, compassion is that expression of that celebration of that oneness. It's encouraging that oneness. There is clarity practices. If you need clarity, there are clarity practices. There are all sorts of there are antidote practices. But compassion practices seem to me to really most deeply address what you're talking about.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Okay. Very helpful.
Thank you so much for this, Chris.
Yeah, thank you.
So my question is about coming down off the mountain. I was really struck by that part. And I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more towards it, both your decision, I mean, you had your own natural waves and evolution in terms of your use with sacred medicine.
Yeah.
And then also something I personally wrestled with was an over-attachment to marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And I also felt like it was really, for many years in a very beautiful way, keeping me connected to the mountain,
Mm-hmm.
to the numinous, to the archetypal realm.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to find, and am still finding, my own relationship to it in order to live my truth in this world in the way that I want to and how I want to do my work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very alive and true for me and also for a lot of my friends in different communities.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious if you could, speak a little more to that, and also something around the intimacy with the divine and how you feel. You said that the veil or something shifted, slowed down or calmed down.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering where you are with that now,
Yeah.
and why it's felt important for you to move in that direction at this point.
Thank you for the very heartfelt question that you're asking. I'll do my best to speak to the same depth from which it comes. I'm Neptune, first house, square sun in the 10th house. Addiction is the shadow of Neptune, right? And Neptune is what allows me to open up into deep fields with kind of relatively ease, but the shadow, and it's what gives me kind of a sensitivity to collective dynamics. But the downside is, the shadow side of it is taking the lower form of unity rather than the higher form of unity. And that's been an issue for me. Addiction of that, not alcohol, but marijuana has been an issue for me, and I've really had to learn and grow it and know when to let it go. I stopped the high dose work for two reasons. One, because I was running into a lot of physical and subtle energy system complications, and I kept thinking that these complications would stop if I kind of went through enough dying experiences. And then eventually I realized, no, they were actually happening because I had gone through so many dying experiences, and they were only going to get worse if I kept on plunging myself into these huge fires. And I had to let the system. And I was doing a lot of purification practice, I was doing a lot of yoga, I was doing a lot of Tibetan deity practices, so I was really getting a lot of support, but I was still running so much energy that my body was telling me, you just got to let that energy calm down, you've got to let it soothe out. But on top of that, there was another reason, and so there's a cautionary note. I'm saying, you all know I speak deeply and positively about psychedelics, but it's a tricky path, and even when you do it really well, and I tried to do it really carefully and really well, it's still tricky. And the main reason I stopped is because I just could not take coming back anymore. The intimacy with the divine, the places that I eventually learned how to move into were so beautiful and so extraordinary and so home and so light that coming back was so painful. Now, there are beings who can live in those places. I know they are. I read them, all honor to the great Mahasiddhas. I'm not one of those beings who can sustain that yet. And going in and out of that condition, and we're not talking about enlightenment. This is something different. This is kind of more like the Mahasiddha, something that in that lineage. Coming back out of it was just becoming too painful, and eventually, I asked the universe never to bring me back into this reality until I wouldn't have to leave. I couldn't take it anymore. I learned that it's possible to have too much God. And that's not, I didn't even you know, but it is. You can just take on more than is healthy to, if you're going to stay with your feet on the earth, you can open yourself too deeply for it. When I stopped that deep work, I went into a sadness that was just excruciating, because I knew when I left, I was never, in my lifetime, I would never be able to go back into that territory again. Because it's like Olympic training. I can't get back to it by dropping a huge amount of acid today. It would take years of work to be able to get back into this territory. It's a momentum thing. I knew I was leaving this forever until I died. And I believe when I die, I'm there. You know, the universe would not be so cruel to not allow me to go back. And if I can get to there, it's an even deal. You know? Coming back down, marijuana allowed me to not, because of all this work, when I would smoke, I would open up pretty big. None of the intermediate kind of stuff. It was just like opening up to the sun. And it was a way of not getting really back down with my feet completely on the ground. It was just, and it was a deepening of my commitment to the mother to give up this particular, because marijuana is a tricky thing. It's a mild psychedelic, but it's also a euphoric, right? And so it gives that little positive glow, you know. And if you're receptive to it and comfortable with it, it's. But it was keeping me literally off the ground. It was keeping me just a little off. And I began to realize that I couldn't finish my life's work in that condition. That was just not good enough. I had to get all the way down into the ground. I had to get all the way down in my body. So I continue to do practice. I do Vajrayana practice. I do Dzogchen practice. I do my thing. And I take teachings, and I sit with the beings who, you know, can give the teachings. But the diamond luminosity domain it's not the same as the state of transparency, the state of shunyata. It's a different reality. There are beings who can live there. I know there are. I'm just not one of them yet. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
One, I'd love to hear more about the human that we're moving towards as a species, or as, you know, and the diamond soul, and also I'm just curious about, you mentioned the moment that you reach when your students are no longer your students, and that doesn't seem to happen here. And so I'm curious how we might relate to that in a place where we are always invited back in as continuing the learning fields. And I don't know whether we're not closing the fields or whether we're closing them in certain ways but leaving parts open, or how that's working. But yeah.
Okay. That's an interesting question. I think I'm okay. Your full-time faculty probably have a better answer to that than I'm going to suggest. But what I'm seeing is not a failure to close the field. That doesn't mean maybe we could close the field better, but, you know, from what I see from a distance and what I've seen from Christina, who was the program coordinator for a while, and she used to write these poems for graduation. Graduation is a tremendous celebration of accomplishment. And you seem to graduate well. You seem to celebrate accomplishments well. You celebrate your dissertations well, and you celebrate your master's thesis well, it seems to me that you do have closure built into your community. You honor your graduates, and bringing graduates back in doesn't mean that the fields haven't been well closed. Now, if there's any fine-tuning to do, well, that's, but I don't think just having an extended community, because, again, you're an unusual community. I mean, really, you see much more than most people see. No wonder you'd get lonely out there. There's not too many people who see what you see. And there are not too many people who are willing to put on their lives on the line the way you have put your lives on the line. So naturally, what would be more natural than to have a community that nourishes itself through your various levels of re-entering the world, kind of, and engaging. Yeah.
I think that's an extremely good answer, Chris, and thanks for the question. It's a great question. The way I tend to think about us PCC faculty and students and alumni, it's not so much in terms of field, though it's helpful. It's a good concept. I think of it much more in terms of individual and somewhat temporary karmic joining of will and mind and affect. And for some people, that joining has great longevity. And for some people, it doesn't. And that seems to me perfectly fine. That some people really come into this community with heart and mind and will in a way that is transformative for those persons and for the community. And other people are in more lightly and thereafter are held in a way that's proportionate to that commitment. And so some of our alums, in a certain sense, haven't left the community no matter where they are. And others, I think I want to say, will hardly here. There is that huge range that seems to me right. It's perfectly fine for each person to be as in many different ways as he or she wishes for that time in their life, given their karmic task and opportunity. And so I don't think of a single field. I think it's a community of many levels, and some of us are trying to operate on all the levels, and some of us are doing just have other commitments, and it will be influential in some respect and not others, and not all. And for some people, no, it's really major, comprehensively transformative. And I think we sort of know who we are, the way we talk to each other. And so when Chris comes in with his very profound and fascinating, and to my mind, very mysterious as well as inspiring biography, it seems to me that he touches very deep places in our community psyche. But I don't for a moment expect that Chris touches all of the members of our community, many of whom are working on a different problem and have different tasks, different opportunities, or are just blocked from something that Chris could give. or they already have moved on to something else. So I'm very impressed by when I think of all the reasons I'm impressed by PCC, and I'm very impressed by the capacity of the entire community to sustain and encourage very impressive plurality, variety of ways of participation. And so for me, field is a little too singular.
Yes, it is.
For who we are as we just look around.
Yeah.
We're really different from each other. Yeah. And it's great that we can come together as deeply and as creatively as we do, given how different we are and will continue to be. This is not a psychological, philosophical boot camp. This is a place where you come through and go out, and something very deep or not so deep will have happened, and I hope you have gratitude and ways of continuing to participate. But the field, I'm not even going to use the word, the community is constantly evolving thanks to the many entirely different, highly unique individuals who come and stir it up and lift it up to new possibilities, the way I think about it. So, at some point, we probably should end.
We got 12 minutes.
Huh? Okay, I'm not in charge. I was only asking.
How about if I answer your second question, because I suspect it may, and maybe that's a good place to stop. Yeah. I mean, the hot tubs are waiting for you, not for us.
Unfortunately, I have a really low-level, totally mundane announcement. This has gone from at such moments. I think about Plato, who wrote the fabulous Symposium and the Republic, and then he had it write the laws, which was 3 times as long as the Republic. And so what I'm about to say has to do with law. Has to do, and I'm glad we live in a country of law, but it's also sometimes, it doesn't have to be.
Okay.
Sometimes sort of a minimal level. So you heard the other night that Rick said because we're not only here in this culture, but we're part of a larger legal culture, institutional, CIIS, etc. We have to observe expectations that institutions and our whole legal system requires us to observe. And so there are 3 groups here. There's faculty, including 2 adjunct faculty. There are students and alums. We could make 3 different suggestions, but I'd like to suggest that we make 2. Faculty time and student time. Try to remember this. Faculty time in the lower tubs is only 8:15 to 9:15 in the morning. And students, therefore, and students and alums are not invited in the tubs at that time. On the upper tub, which some of you perhaps don't even know about, is actually a square handicap tub. It's not quite as beautiful, but it's sometimes very, very quiet. Not always. That tub, there are 2 times when you can't go. One is the same as the others, 8:15 to 9:15 in the morning, and also 10 to 11 at night. In other words, right now, by the time you get there, you shouldn't go to the upper tub. You should go to one of the 3.
It's already there.
Right. Did you say Sean? Yeah. Okay. I hope Robert doesn't change this rule. Anyway, is it clear and can you remember it? Okay. Thanks. Clear and remembered. Thank you very much, because you don't want to keep talking about it. And I'm really glad you have 23 hours, all right, in the lower tubs. Enjoy them.
Enjoy your 1 hour.
Huh?
Enjoy your 1 hour.
Yeah.
We have only 1 hour.
I was just trying in the lower.
Yeah, but you already heard.
I was just.
That's true.
But Rick's lived half his life here. The others we've all been here 25 years, 30 years. Don't worry, you're here. It's a special thing for you. We want you to have as much as possible. We also want to thank Chris first for his wonderful work, his inspiring, deep, profound, transformative work, his wonderful writings, and for this extra conversation, which I thought was even more disclosing. So we do thank you and applaud you.
You are wonderful. Really, I can't tell you how wonderful it is when I get to come here and spend time with you and to mix it up with you and to listen to what you have to say and what you do. Really, you're just an extraordinary group of people. My heart is really deeply touched.
Can you speak briefly to that, Josh?
About the question? Okay. This has been something, it's been a reoccurring and deepening theme of my psychedelic work. It went on for many, many years. And a big hunk of it was, I put it down in the chapter in Dark Night, Early Dawn on the Great Awakening chapter. But it kept on going after that, and in the last 3 sessions of I didn't know it was ending, but it was about to end. The universe gave me 3 last installments, 3 last pieces. And one of them was the capstone of a series of installments around the evolutionary project and the future human. And it'll be in, this book, and maybe I'll make this particular session available to the PCC group, and I'll give it to Rick or Robert and let it go out. It was the most absolutely profoundly disorienting, dismemberment, not just reality ripped apart. I mean, really, 70 sessions in, you wouldn't think that you could go through something like this. I mean, you would think it would be used up, But it was just an absolute ripped down, total shattering of reality in order to give me one last piece, in order to finish this installment on what's coming forward. And this is something that's taking place at the deep level of the collective psyche. This is, we all live our lives and we die and reborn, and we do it within a certain cradle, and that cradle is the archetype of the human species that we are at this point in history. And what's happening is that cradle is about to shift. The fundamental underlying structure of the human psyche is about to shift. And so the entire baseline of what we're dying and being reborn into is about to change. When we make this transition, and we will all be there in some way, shape, or form, we will feel it, we'll be part of it. It's going to be multiple generations, but we will all be part of it. And when it happens, and as it happens, and as this exquisite creature comes out of our historical womb and walks the earth, we will look back on all the pain from Homo erectus, all the terrible suffering, all the things we've done to each other, all the horrendous things we've done to each other, all the loneliness and all the terrible things. We will look back on it and say, it was worth it. It was worth it, because this being is the most exquisite, beautiful being. Picture a humanity with its heart completely healed of all the wars and of all the rapes and of all the, just completely whole again in a new way. Picture the mind just radiantly strong, not fragmented, not torn apart, and no conflict within the psyche, no push-pull, just completely transparent on the earth, of the earth, green to its roots, and yet at the same time in easy communion with the surrounding intelligence of the universe. Heaven on earth for such a species as this. You know? It was one of the greatest blessings of all the work, just to be able to see what history is making, what is in the process of emerging. And the sessions told me, you have to start writing more about the future human. Because when it gets dark, and we're going into the darkness, if you don't have a vision of what's coming, if you don't understand what's being birthed by the pain, you're going to get lost in the pain. The humans will get lost, and it'll. But if you have a vision, and you all know, you all have the intuition. You had it before you were born. You took it into this incarnation. You feel it. And it's important to hold on to that. It's important to really, really deeply in your bones know that everything that you're investing in, you are working with the universe to bring this forward. And it will come forward. It's taking us right up to the edge of extinction. Really, the old has to die in order to give birth to this magnificent creature. This is a species of Buddhas, a species of Christs, a species of prophets. This is when the feminine is completely healed and reconciled with the masculine, giving complete unprecedented access to the blessings of cosmic intelligence. And it is absolutely embodied. No up and out cosmologies, no escapist theologies anymore. And no bardo. The bardo is in the process of emptying itself in this process. The bardo is a fragment is a condition of a temporary condition in the evolutionary saga. We are in the process, by becoming more integrated, we are in the process of emptying the bardo. This species will not need that type of buffer. Mm-hmm. This is what we're working. This is one person's poor grasp at what we are working for, but I think we all feel it. We know it. I mean, this is just a piece of one person seeing something. What it is much bigger than any one person can see. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.